Go meet a grizzly bear, my son whispered, then gunned the engine. He left me to die in the Alaskan wilderness, 100 miles from help, all for my life savings. He thought the cold would finish me. He forgot I spent 25 years as an Army Ranger, and I was about to remind him that old soldiers don't die easy. If you're listening to this, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you are watching from. It helps to know I'm not just talking to the wind. Let me take you back. Before the ice, before the betrayal, back to when I still thought I had a son. My name is Tom Anderson. I'm 60 years old. I built a quiet life in Oregon after the Rangers, a carpentry business. I know how to read terrain, and I thought I knew my son, Ryan. I was wrong. The trouble didn't start in Alaska. It started in the house Elizabeth, my late wife. His mother and I built with our own hands. 3 years she's been gone. She was the glue. Without her, Ryan and I were just two broken pieces. It started with the money. It always starts with the money. Ryan developed expensive tastes. He called them aggressive investments. I called it gambling. He was trying to live a lifestyle he felt he deserved, and he expected me to pay for it. 2 months ago, it all came to a head. I was in my workshop. The smell of sawdust usually calmed me. That night, the air felt heavy, charged. Ryan burst in. He didn't knock. He looked terrible. Eyes bloodshot, hands shaking. He paced back and forth, radiating a desperation that felt dangerous. I need a loan, Dad, he demanded. Not asked. Demanded. I put down my chisel. How much, Ryan? He looked away. He always looked away when he lied. A lot. I need you to mortgage the house, and I need your retirement savings. Nearly $1 million? Everything I had left. No, Ryan, I won't do it. I couldn't enable his recklessness. I couldn't sacrifice the security. Elizabeth and I worked so hard to build. His reaction was immediate and terrifying. His face twisted. A vein pulsed in his forehead. He slammed his fist on my workbench. The tools rattled. The sound echoed in the small space. The silence stretched, tight as a tripwire. You're choosing money over your own son, he screamed. I'm choosing responsibility, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. We can find another way. Financial counseling. Speaking to these people you owe. They don't do counseling, Dad, he roared. He swept a stack of blueprints off my desk. They scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. They break legs. Vinny doesn't negotiate. Vinny Russo, a local loan shark. Ruthless, dangerous. The name confirmed my worst fears. I looked at the scattered blueprints. Plans for a quiet future. It all felt suddenly fragile. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. The silence that followed was cold and vast, and I realized, with a chilling certainty, that my son was a stranger to me, and a dangerous one at that. The next day I got a visitor. It wasn't Ryan. I was sitting on the porch. A black sedan pulled into the driveway. Vinny Russo got out. He was short, stocky, dressed in an expensive suit that didn't fit quite right. He always wore sunglasses, even when it was cloudy. He walked towards me, smiling, a cold, dead smile. Tom Anderson, he said, his voice smooth, oily. A pleasure. Vinny, I said, standing up. I didn't offer him a seat. Your son owes me a substantial amount of money, Vinny continued, still smiling, and the interest is compounding daily. That's between you and Ryan, I said, my voice firm. It becomes my business when he uses your assets as collateral, Vinny said, his smile fading. He took off his sunglasses. His eyes were dark, empty. He told me you would cover his debts. He was wrong. Vinny chuckled. A dry, humorless sound. You're a stubborn man, Tom. I respect that. But let me be clear. He stepped closer, invading my space. If I don't get my money by the end of the month, I will take this house, and I will break your son, piece by piece. He turned and walked away. He didn't look back. The threat hung in the air, heavy, suffocating. Vinny wasn't bluffing. I called Ryan. He didn't answer. I drove to his apartment. He wasn't there. I found him at a high-end restaurant with Sarah. Sarah was his new girlfriend, beautiful, polished, with eyes that always seemed to be calculating the value of everything around her. She liked nice things, and Ryan liked making her happy. They were drinking champagne, laughing. I walked up to their table. Ryan looked up, startled. Sarah glared at me, annoyed by the interruption. We need to talk, I said to Ryan. Dad, not now, he hissed, embarrassed. Now, I insisted. He sighed, threw his napkin on the table, and followed me outside. Vinny came to see me, I said, my voice low, furious. He threatened to take the house. He threatened to break you. Ryan shrugged. A gesture of indifference that infuriated me. So pay him, Dad. It's simple. I'm not paying him, Ryan, I shouted. I'm not sacrificing everything because you wanted to impress this girl. I gestured towards the restaurant, towards Sarah. Sarah has nothing to do with this, Ryan lied. She has everything to do with this, I countered. She's bleeding you dry, Ryan, and you're too blind to see it. She's encouraging this madness. He stepped back, his face hardening. Don't talk about her like that. He turned and walked back into the restaurant. He left me standing on the sidewalk, alone. The silence between us grew deeper, darker. Then, out of the blue, he called me. His voice was smooth, almost too smooth. Dad, let's go on a trip, he said. Just the two of us, like we used to. He suggested Alaska in November, the coldest, darkest time of the year. A father-son bonding experience. He used Elizabeth's memory as leverage. Mom would have wanted this, he said. It was a low blow, but God help me. I wanted my son back. My instincts screamed at me. This wasn't about reconnection. It was a trap. But I agreed to the trip. I wasn't naive. I knew I had to be prepared. I had to know for sure what he was capable of. The day before we left, I did something I never thought I would do. I called Mr. Henderson, Arthur Henderson, our family lawyer, a good man, a bit stuffy, always in a suit, but by the book. We met at his office. It smelled of old paper and expensive coffee. Tom, good to see you, Mr. Henderson said, shaking my hand. I need to make some changes to my will, Arthur, I said, my voice low. I sat down heavily in the leather chair. And I need to set up an irrevocable trust. An irrevocable trust, he asked, surprised. He adjusted his glasses. That's a big step, Tom. Are you sure? Everything is already set up for Ryan? I've never been more sure of anything in my life, I replied. I told him what I wanted. He drew up the papers. I signed them. A cold dread washed over me as the ink dried. I hoped I was wrong about Ryan. I prayed I was wrong. The trip was a final test, a test of his character, a test of his humanity, a test he was about to fail spectacularly. We arrived in Alaska. The cold hit us like a physical blow. Alaska is different. The cold doesn't just bite. It consumes you. It's heavy, ancient. We took a snowmobile deep into the Denali wilderness, far off the usual trails. Ryan claimed he knew a spot, an old trapper's route he'd found online. The landscape was beautiful. White mountains stretched as far as the eye could see, but it was terrifying. A place where mistakes were fatal, and I realized I might have made the biggest mistake of my life by coming here. Just before we set out that morning, Ryan did something strange. We were packing the sled. Let me check the batteries on your emergency beacon, Dad, he offered. I always carried one in the wilderness, a lifeline. I handed it over without a second thought. He fiddled with it for a moment, his back turned to me. Then he handed it back. All good, he said, smiling. But the smile didn't reach his eyes. They were cold, empty. I didn't realize it then, but that moment sealed my fate. We were deep in the wilderness now. The snow was deep, the sky a bruised, heavy gray. The wind was picking up. We finally stopped in a small clearing, sheltered by a ridge of jagged rocks and towering spruce trees. The light was already fading. We'll set up camp here, Ryan announced. He cut the engine. The silence rushed in immediately. It was deafening. We worked without speaking. The tension between us was a tangible thing, a tripwire waiting to be sprung. We set up the heavy-duty winter tent, started the portable heater. I watched Ryan. He was meticulous about certain gear. The fuel levels. The satellite phone clipped securely to his belt. The emergency rations. He seemed nervous, agitated. His eyes constantly scanned the tree line. I knew it wasn't bears he was worried about. He was preparing, but for what? We ate a meal of dehydrated stew. The steam rose in the small tent. The orange glow of the heater cast eerie shadows. The silence stretched, tight, uncomfortable. Finally, I put my bowl down. It was time. Ryan, we need to talk, I said. My voice was low but firm. He looked up. His eyes were guarded. About what? About why we're really here. This isn't about bonding, is it? You think if you get me out here, isolated, you can pressure me into giving you the money. He laughed. A sharp, ugly sound. You always were paranoid, Dad. Always the soldier. Am I wrong? I pressed. He stared at me. A long moment passed. Then his facade cracked. The mask slipped. He stood up, pacing the small space of the tent like a caged animal. Okay, fine. Yes, I need the money. His voice shook slightly. Then he gave me until the end of the week. If I don't pay him, I'm a dead man. And Sarah, she won't stick around if I'm broke. Sarah, so she was the driving force behind his desperation. I told you, Ryan, we can handle this. We can go to the police. The police can't protect me. He stopped pacing and glared at me. You don't understand the world I'm in. Your world is small. What I understand, I said, my voice rising, is that I will not sacrifice my life savings. The security I built for your mother and me, to cover your mistakes. The argument escalated quickly. Your life savings, he shouted, his face contorted with a rage that shocked me. It's just money, Dad. I'm your son. How can you be so incredibly selfish? Selfish. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. Selfish? I gave you everything, Ryan. My voice trembled with the weight of years. A good life? He sneered. He gestured around the tent. This boring, middle-class mediocrity? I want more than that, Dad. I deserve more. Sarah deserves more. The entitlement was staggering. He stepped closer. His eyes were wide, wild. You're sitting on nearly $1 million, and you're just letting it sit there while I drown. I looked at him, truly looked at him. I didn't recognize the boy I had raised. The boy who used to build model airplanes with me in the workshop. That boy was gone, replaced by a man consumed by a greed so vast it terrified me. I need to clear my head, I said. I grabbed my jacket. The air in the tent was suddenly suffocating. I'm going to check the perimeter. I needed space. I needed air. I stepped out into the biting cold. The wind howled through the trees. Snow swirled across the clearing in mesmerizing, deadly patterns. I walked towards the ridge. I needed a moment to process the depth of Ryan's desperation, and the chilling realization that he viewed me not as his father but as an obstacle, a problem to be solved. I stood on the ridge, looking out at the endless expanse of white, beautiful, terrifying, a place where mistakes were fatal. Then I heard it. The snowmobile engine roared to life. I turned around, confused. The sound was sharp, aggressive. I hurried back down the slope, slipping on the packed snow. My heart started to pound. A cold dread, different from the ambient temperature, began to spread through my chest. Something was wrong, very wrong. When I reached the clearing, my blood ran cold. Ryan was sitting on the machine, the engine idling. The tent was gone, the supplies, the heater, the satellite phone on his belt. Everything was packed onto the sled. The campsite was stripped bare, as if we were never there. Ryan, I shouted. The dread washed over me, heavier than the snow. What are you doing? What is this? He looked at me. The expression on his face chilled me more than the Alaskan winter ever could. It was empty, cold, detached. He looked at me as if I were already dead. I can't wait any more, Dad, he said. His voice was flat, emotionless. Wait for what? Ryan, don't be foolish. Panic started to rise in my throat. It's 20 below zero. We're 100 miles from the nearest outpost. If you leave me here, I will die. You're a ranger, right? He said. A cruel smirk played on his lips. Lead the way. You always said you could survive anything. Ryan, this is murder, I whispered. He revved the engine. No, Dad. This is nature taking its course. You're old, weak. It was your time anyway. He paused, and frankly, this is cleaner than waiting for you to kick the bucket. And then he delivered the final blow. Bye, Dad. Go meet a grizzly bear. He hit the throttle. The snowmobile shot forward, kicking up a cloud of snow that blinded me. I watched, paralyzed by shock. The red taillight disappeared into the encroaching darkness. He was gone. The silence that followed was absolute. The wind howled, a mournful symphony of betrayal. I stood alone in the clearing, the darkness pressing in on me. My son had left me to die. For money, the realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. My knees buckled. I collapsed into the snow. The cold immediately seeped through my clothes, into my bones. I wanted to scream, to rage, to give up. The betrayal was so massive, so unthinkable. I lay there for a long time. The snow fell softly on my face. Numbness spread through my limbs. Hypothermia beginning to set in. It would be so easy. Just close my eyes. Let the cold take me. Elizabeth. I thought of her face, her smile, her strength. But then, decades of training kicked in. The instinct to survive. It surged through the despair. Survival, assessment, action. Panic is the enemy. Panic kills faster than the cold. I forced myself to stand up. My limbs were stiff. Clumsy. I assessed my resources. Heavy winter gear, a pocket knife, a flint striker in my emergency pouch. No food, no shelter, no communication. I reached into my jacket pocket, searching for the personal emergency beacon. The one Ryan had checked this morning. I pulled it out. It felt light. I opened the battery compartment. Empty. He hadn't checked the batteries. He had removed them. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't spontaneous. It was calculated. A meditated murder. The depth of his deceit was staggering. But that realization also fueled a new emotion. Anger. A cold, burning anger that warred with the grief. I had to survive. Not just to live, but to confront him, to make him face the consequences. First, shelter. I couldn't stay in the open. The wind was too strong, the temperature dropping rapidly. I found a large spruce tree. Low-hanging branches reached the ground. A natural shelter. I used my knife to cut more pine boughs, weaving them into a makeshift lean-to. I packed snow around the base to insulate it. Crude, barely a coffin-sized space. But it was something. It was a start. Next, fire. Fire was life. I scraped away the snow down to the frozen earth, gathered dry twigs and bark. My fingers were already numb, stiff, useless. I used the flint striker. Sparks showered onto the tinder. It took several tries. My hands trembled with cold and adrenaline. Finally, a small flame flickered to life. I nurtured that flame like a newborn child until it was a sustainable fire. I huddled close. The warmth barely made a dent, but the psychological boost was immense. I was alive. For now, the first night was brutal. The darkness was absolute. A black void. The silence broken only by the cracking of the ice, and the distant, mournful howls of wolves. The howls grew closer, echoing through the trees. I could see the reflection of eyes in the firelight. A wolf pack. They were curious, testing the boundaries. I was weak, armed only with a knife and the fire. I decided to build up the fire. The flames danced higher. I grabbed a burning branch, waving it in the air. "Get back!" I yelled, my voice rough, primal. The wolves hesitated, paced, then disappeared back into the shadows like smoke. I was safe, for now, but the fear remained. A cold knot in my stomach. I didn't sleep. I shivered and remembered. Ryan's first steps, his laughter, his high school graduation. I mourned the loss of my son. The Ryan I knew was dead. The man who drove away was a monster wearing his face. When dawn broke, the world was white and unforgiving. I was hungry. The emptiness in my stomach, a gnawing pain. I needed water. I used a piece of curved bark, scooped snow, melted it painstakingly over the coals. It tasted like smoke and ash, but it was life. I started walking, following the tracks of the snowmobile. They were already partially filled with fresh snow, but I could still make them out. The outpost was 100 miles away. A suicide mission. But staying put was a guaranteed death. I had no choice but to move. The journey was agonizing. The snow was deep, sometimes up to my knees. Every step exhausting. The cold was relentless. I rationed my energy, moving slowly, deliberately, one foot in front of the other. That became my mantra. The second day blurred into the third. Hunger became a constant, debilitating companion. A dull ache that never went away. I tried to set snares, using the inner fibers of tree bark, hoping to catch a snowshoe hare, but the small animals were scarce. I found some rose hips frozen on a bush, meager vitamins, a small boost. But it wasn't enough. I was slowly starving to death. My body was consuming itself. If this story has kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit the like button, and don't forget to subscribe. It helps our channel grow and bring more stories like this to light, because the next part of the journey almost killed me. On the afternoon of the third day, I reached a wide, frozen river. The ice looked thick, gray, solid, but I knew appearances could be deceiving. I needed to cross it. Going around could add days I didn't have. I had to risk it. I tested the ice with a long branch. It seemed solid. I took a tentative step, distributing my weight evenly. Then another. I was halfway across, the wind whipping across the exposed surface, stealing my warmth, when I heard a sharp crack. Like a rifle shot, the ice beneath my feet gave way. I plunged into the freezing water. The shock was paralyzing. The cold hit me like a physical entity, stealing my breath. I gasped, inhaling icy water. The current pulled at my legs, trying to drag me under the ice shelf. I was dying. I fought against the panic, kicked my legs, clawing at the edge of the ice. My gloved fingers slipped on the smooth surface. My heavy winter gear was waterlogged, dragging me down like an anchor. My lungs burned with a desperate heave, fueled by sheer terror and adrenaline. I pulled myself out of the water. I rolled onto the solid ice, gasping for air. I was soaked. Hypothermia would set in within minutes. I was already shivering violently. I stumbled towards the bank, my clothes already freezing solid, turning into an icy armor. I had to get a fire started. Now, or I was dead. My hands were numb. Useless claws. I couldn't grip the flint striker. I dropped it in the snow. I frantically searched for it. Desperation mounting. Tears of frustration froze on my cheeks. I found it, but my hands were shaking so violently I couldn't strike it against the knife. This was it. Ryan was going to win. I looked up at the sky. A wave of despair washed over me. I was so tired, and then I thought of Elizabeth again. Her unwavering belief in me. I wouldn't give up. Not now. Not ever. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, focused all my willpower in my hands. I forced them to obey me. I jammed the striker against the metal zipper of my jacket, using the friction to create a spark. It worked. The small pile of tinder caught fire. I stripped off my frozen clothes, the fabric tearing as I pulled it from my skin. My skin was blue, mottled. I huddled by the fire, naked and vulnerable. The heat scorched my skin as the feeling returned painfully, needles of fire shooting through my limbs. But I didn't care. I was alive. But I was weaker than ever. It took hours to dry my clothes. The near-death experience drained my already depleted reserves. I had lost precious time and energy. The fourth day brought a new challenge. The snowmobile tracks disappeared completely. A blizzard had blown through overnight, erasing all signs of Ryan's passage. The world was a blank slate. I was truly lost. The vast wilderness suddenly felt infinitely larger, infinitely emptier, and the hope I had clung to started to fade. I had to make a critical choice: continue in the general direction of the outpost, or backtrack towards the river. I decided to climb the nearest ridge, hoping to get a better view, perhaps spot a sign of civilization, a light, a plume of smoke. Anything. The climb was treacherous. The rocks covered in ice. I slipped several times, my hands and knees bleeding, the blood freezing almost instantly. My body screamed in protest. But I reached the top. I looked out at the vast wilderness. Snow-covered mountains stretched as far as the eye could see, an endless ocean of white. There was nothing. I was overwhelmed by the immensity of the landscape, the sheer hopelessness of my situation. I sat down on the ridge, the wind whipping around me, the cold finally breaking through my defenses. This was the breaking point. The exhaustion, the hunger, the cold, the betrayal, it all crashed down on me simultaneously. I wept. The tears flowed hot and heavy, freezing on my cheeks. I cried for Elizabeth. I cried for the son I had lost. I cried for myself. I was broken, physically and emotionally. The temptation to surrender, to close my eyes, and let the cold embrace me. It was almost irresistible. I just wanted the pain to stop. This is how it ends, alone on a frozen mountain. Maybe he was right. Maybe I am just an old, weak man. But as the tears subsided, the anger returned. Cleaner and sharper this time. A burning ember in the ashes of my despair. He thought he could discard me. He thought I was weak. He thought he could erase me from the world and claim his inheritance without consequence. He was wrong. I stood up, a renewed determination hardening my resolve. I would survive, and I would have my reckoning. I used the sun and the stars to navigate, relying on my old ranger skills. It was slow going, but I kept moving, driven by a primal need for justice. On the 5th day, I caught a break. I found a small cave, hidden behind a curtain of ice near a frozen waterfall, dry and sheltered from the wind. I built a fire. More importantly, I finally managed to catch a snowshoe hare in one of my snares. I cooked it over the open flame. The meat was tough and gamey, but it was the most delicious thing I had ever tasted. A surge of energy, a renewal of hope. I felt stronger. I rested in the cave for a full day, regaining some of my strength. I thought about what was happening back home. Ryan would have returned to civilization, reported me missing. A tragic accident. He would play the grieving son. He and Uraz would be spending my money, planning my funeral, while I was still alive. The thought made me sick. I decided I had to confront him myself. Face to face, before the law intervened. Legal justice wasn't enough. I needed moral justice. I needed to see his face when he realized he had failed. On the morning of the 7th day, I saw it, a thin plume of smoke rising above the tree line in the distance. Hope surged through me, powerful and overwhelming. I stumbled towards the source, my exhaustion forgotten. I prayed it wasn't a hallucination. I found a small, rustic cabin nestled in a clearing. A man was outside, chopping wood, a rifle leaning against the porch. He looked up as I approached, his eyes widening in surprise. I must have looked like a wild man, gaunt, frostbitten, covered in filth. My face was ravaged by the cold. He was tall, weathered, with a beard streaked with gray. There was something intensely familiar about him. "Tom?" he said, his voice rough with disbelief. "Tom Anderson." I stared at him, my mind foggy, and then it hit me like a bolt of lightning. "Mike? Mike Harrison?" It was Mike, a buddy from my old ranger unit. We hadn't seen each other in 15 years. He had moved up to Alaska after leaving the service. A bush pilot, living off the grid. "What in the world happened to you, Tom?" he asked, rushing towards me. "You look like death warmed over." I collapsed onto the porch steps. My legs finally gave out. He brought me inside. The cabin was warm. It smelled of wood smoke and coffee. He gave me water, warm broth. As I ate, the story spilled out of me. The trip, the betrayal. Vinny, Sarah, the 7 days of hell. Mike listened in silence, his face growing darker with every word. When I finished, he just shook his head, his eyes filled with a cold fury that mirrored my own. "Your own son," he muttered, disgust dripping from his voice. "The search parties are out looking for you," he said. "It's been on the local news." He showed me a newspaper clipping. "Retired Army Ranger missing in Denali Wilderness. They're concentrating on the area where Ryan said you went missing." Mike continued, "Miles from here, in the opposite direction." "He lied about the location?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Of course he did," Mike said, his voice grim. "And that's not all." He handed me another article. "Son fears father's dementia led to disappearance." "He told them you were getting confused lately," Mike explained. "Showing signs of dementia. Said you wandered off during the night." Dementia. The depth of his deceit was staggering. He wasn't just trying to kill me. He was trying to erase my dignity, to make my death seem like the result of my own weakness. The anger burned hotter than ever. He was destroying my memory before I was even dead. "I need to get home, Mike," I said, a new urgency gripping me. "I need to get home before he thinks he's won. The authorities need to know you're alive," Mike insisted. "No," I said firmly. "Not yet. If they announce I'm found, he might run. He and Sarah. I want to look him in the eye when he realizes what he's done." Mike understood. The need for a personal reckoning, a soldier's justice. He agreed to fly me back to Oregon. Secretly, the flight was a blur. I looked down at the vast wilderness that had almost claimed me, beautiful and terrifying. But the real monster wasn't down there. It was waiting for me at home. We landed at a small, private airstrip outside Portland late at night. The city lights felt alien, overwhelming. Mike gave me some cash and a burner phone. "Call the police when you're ready," he said, gripping my shoulder tightly. "And Tom, make him pay." Sarah nodded. "I will." I didn't take a cab straight home. I needed information first. I needed to know what I was walking into. I called Jake, my neighbor, a retired accountant, nosy but reliable. He always knew what was happening on the street. "Tom?" Jake sounded confused. "Tom, is that you?" They said you were dead. "I'm alive, Jake," I said, my voice low. "I need you to tell me what's been happening at the house." Jake hesitated. "Ryan's been here, with that girlfriend of his. Sarah. What have they been doing?" "They've been busy, Tom," Jake said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Throwing parties, expensive cars in the driveway. And they had Mr. Henderson over earlier tonight." "Mr. Henderson." My blood ran cold. They were already moving to settle the estate. "Yes," Jake confirmed. "And Tom, there's something else." "What is it?" "Vinny Russo was here yesterday," Jake said. "He was arguing with Ryan on the front lawn. It got ugly. Ryan looked scared, Tom. Really scared. So Vinny was turning up the pressure. Ryan was desperate, and he thought he had just inherited a fortune." I thanked Jake and hung up. I knew what I had to do. I took a cab towards my house. The familiar streets. The houses decorated for the upcoming holidays. Christmas lights twinkled cheerfully. It felt strange, surreal. I was a ghost returning to my own life. As we pulled up to the house, I saw lights on in the living room. Mr. Henderson's sedan was still parked in the driveway, and next to it, a brand new BMW. Ryan's new car, bought with my money. It was nearly midnight. I paid the cab driver and walked slowly towards the front door. My legs were weak, my body battered and broken, but my resolve was steel. I used my key. The sound of the lock turning echoed in the quiet hallway. I could hear their voices coming from the living room. Laughter, the clinking of glasses. They were celebrating. "It's a tragedy, Ryan. A terrible tragedy," Mr. Henderson was saying. His voice somber, laced with professional sympathy. "But we have to deal with the practicalities. The house, the retirement accounts, the life insurance policy. Your father was very organized," Mr. Henderson continued. "The will is clear. As the sole beneficiary, everything goes to you." "I know," Ryan said, his voice thick with perfectly rehearsed false grief. "It's just so hard to think about money at a time like this." "Of course it is," Sarah chimed in, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "But your father would want you to be strong, Ryan, to honor his legacy by taking care of the assets he left behind." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. I closed my eyes for a moment, gathering my strength, controlling the rage that threatened to consume me. Then I walked into the living room. They didn't see me at first. Brian and Sarah were sitting on the sofa. The one Elizabeth had loved, glasses of my expensive whiskey in their hands. Mr. Henderson was sitting opposite them, organizing a thick stack of documents on the coffee table. My life reduced to paperwork. I cleared my throat. They turned. The reactions were instantaneous. Mr. Henderson gasped, his eyes widening with shock. He stood up so quickly he knocked over his glass. "Tom? Oh my God, Tom. We thought you were dead. This is a miracle." Sarah stared at me, her mouth hanging open. The color drained from her face. But Ryan looked like he had seen a ghost. His face turned a sickly pale gray. His eyes bulged with sheer, unadulterated terror. He dropped the glass. The whiskey spilled onto the expensive rug, a dark stain spreading across the fibers. How?" he stammered, his voice choked. "The search party, they said. They said it was impossible." I walked slowly towards him. I was gaunt, bruised, ravaged by frostbite. My clothes torn and dirty, I looked like a corpse, but in that moment, I had never felt stronger. I survived, Ryan, I said, my voice calm and steady, cutting through the tension like a knife. It seems the grizzlies weren't hungry. He flinched at the words, his own words thrown back at him. Tom, what happened out there? Mr. Henderson asked, rushing towards me. Ryan said you wandered off, that you were confused. Dementia. Ryan lied, I said. Keeping my eyes locked on my son, I wanted to see the fear in his eyes. I didn't wander off, I continued, my voice rising. He left me there. He took the supplies, the phone, the snowmobile. I pointed a trembling finger at him. He left me to die in the wilderness. For money. Mr. Henderson staggered back, horror dawning on his face. Ryan, is this true? Ryan tried to recover his composure, to regain his mask. But it was too late. He's lying. Ryan shouted, pointing at me. He's confused. Traumatized. He doesn't know what he's saying. He's delusional, Sarah added, her voice cold, dismissive. He needs help. I know exactly what I'm saying, Ryan, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. I remember your exact words. Go meet a grizzly bear. Ryan knew he was caught. The desperation returned, making him reckless. I had to, he cried, his voice rising in panic. I needed the money. You wouldn't help me. He stood up, facing me. Vinny was going to kill me. You were going to let me die. So you decided to murder me instead? I shouted, the anger finally breaking through. Raw and volcanic. Your own father? It wasn't supposed to happen like this, he pleaded, tears streaming down his face. Tears of fear and self-pity, not remorse. We were desperate, Sarah interjected, standing up next to Ryan. She placed a hand on his arm, a gesture of support that sickened me. You were involved in this? I asked, looking at her. We did what we had to do, she said, her eyes defiant. The admission hung in the air, cold, calculated. It's over, Ryan, I said, my voice heavy with exhaustion and sadness. I looked at Mr. Henderson. I need you to call the police. My son and his girlfriend have committed a heinous crime. Mr. Henderson nodded, his face grim. He pulled out his phone and dialed 911. Ryan looked at me, his expression shifting from fear to a dawning realization. His life was over, but I wasn't finished yet. Wait, I said. I stopped Mr. Henderson before he could speak to the operator. There's something else. I turned back to Ryan and Sarah. You wanted the inheritance so badly. You were willing to kill me for it. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. Well, I have a surprise for you. Ryan looked at me, a flicker of desperate hope in his eyes. Before we left for the trip, I explained, my voice calm again, the anger replaced by a cold finality. I had a meeting with Mr. Henderson. Ryan's eyes darted to the lawyer. Confusion warring with fear. I knew what you were planning, Ryan, I continued. I saw the darkness growing in you. I shook my head slowly. I was hoping, praying that I was wrong. The trip was a final test, a test of your character, your humanity. I looked him straight in the eye. And you failed. I nodded at Mr. Henderson. He reached into his briefcase, pulled out a different set of documents, the ones I had signed the day before we left. Tom asked me to draw up these papers last week, Mr. Henderson said, his voice shaking slightly. He handed the documents to Ryan. He put the house and all his assets into an irrevocable trust. Ryan stared at the documents, speechless. Sarah looked over his shoulder, her eyes widening in disbelief and horror. The beneficiary of the trust, I continued, delivering the final blow, is the Wounded Warrior Project. I paused. The charity Elizabeth supported passionately for years. The realization hit them like a physical blow. The inheritance they coveted, the money they were willing to murder me for. It was gone. They got nothing. You can't do this, Ryan screamed, his voice cracking, the sound of a broken man. He lunged at me, but I stood my ground. It's mine. I deserve it. It's my birthright. You deserve nothing, I said, my voice heavy with finality. You forfeited your right to be my son when you left me in the wilderness. Sarah's facade finally cracked. You stupid old man, she shrieked, her face twisted with rage. "We should have made sure you were dead." The sound of sirens filled the air, growing louder and louder, until the flashing red and blue lights bathed the living room in a cold, harsh glow. The police burst into the house, led by a stern-looking detective, Officer Miller. "Mr. Anderson," Officer Miller asked, looking at me, taking in my appearance. "I'm Tom Anderson," I said, "and I want to report an attempted murder." They arrested Ryan and Sarah for attempted murder, conspiracy, and elder abuse. As they handcuffed him, Ryan thrashed and screamed, looking at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. The monster was fully exposed now. Sarah was silent, her eyes cold and dead as they led her away. When they were gone, the house was silent again. But this time, the silence felt different. Cleaner, safer. Mr. Henderson and I sat in the wreckage of the living room. The spilled whiskey a dark stain on the rug, a symbol of the stain on our family. "I'm so sorry, Tom," Mr. Henderson whispered. "I never imagined he was capable of something like this. I feel like a fool. He fooled us all, Arthur," I said. I sat down on the sofa, the exhaustion finally hitting me, the adrenaline fading, leaving only a profound, aching sadness, a hollow emptiness in my chest. I looked at the fireplace, where Elizabeth's picture stood on the mantelpiece. Her smiling face looked back at me, a reminder of the love and light that used to fill this house. And for the first time since I returned, I broke down. The tears flowed, hot and heavy. I wasn't crying because I almost died. I wasn't crying because of the physical pain or the grueling ordeal in the wilderness. I was crying for the little boy who used to hold my hand when he was scared. I was crying for the son I loved with all my heart, the son I had lost long before that fateful trip to Alaska. I had survived the wilderness, but the real survival was accepting the truth. However painful it was, I had faced the grizzly bear, and it had my son's eyes. But I was still here, and I had protected Elizabeth's legacy from the corrosive touch of greed. The house was empty now, the silence heavy with the ghosts of the past. But I was not broken. I was wounded, scarred, but I was alive, and that was my victory. Thanks for listening. If this story moved you, please rate it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe.